crack down on crime. I'll make yobs clean the streets, says Priti, as in Patel. PM gets tough on burglars. Free burglars to wear 24-hour tags. Minister, I've been reading these sort of headlines for more than the last 10 years. Why should we believe them this time? Good morning.
Well, good morning, Governor. Well, hopefully you'll believe them this time, not least because you and I have got form on crime. And when I was last, I guess, a frequent appearer on your show 10 years ago, I was working on crime in London, I hope successfully, and we're trying to bring some of those techniques and motivation to crime now. As you will know, over the last couple of years, we've been really focused on trying to drive crime down. That was interfered with somewhat by COVID, where we saw patterns of crime change, and we obviously had to focus on protecting the public from the virus as well. But coming out of that, the Prime Minister wanted to restate the mission, illustrate what we've been doing, particularly on drugs and county lines and violence, where there's a particular problem, and then point the voyage, if you like, on crime forward into the future, adding to it the fulfillment of some basic expectations that the public have of the police around levels of kind of customer service that we want to see improve, on top of us getting underneath the skin of crime and really driving these numbers down.
In fact, they said that they have no confidence in the Home Secretary, your boss.
Well, that's what the police Fed have said. And on that day, when it came out, I was out on a tour in South Wales talking to police officers, and they were very focused on their mission. Look, I hope it's been tough this year. I hope that we can return to some kind of normality in the future. But, you know, our economy is in some difficulties. Obviously, the private sector has taken a big hit, and it's the private sector that pays for the public sector. And we have to balance all those things. And Treasury ministers do that every day. And I know these are difficult decisions, but, you know, focusing on crime, making sure that police officers feel supported and valued, that there are lots more of them out there, is a key part of our mission. And that's what we want to promote today.
Next, and the fact that the government is announcing new policing reforms today. Don't the police deserve a pay rise?
Well, look, we want to make sure that officers feel valued and rewarded and are supported in doing their job. And, you know, while obviously a decision was taken last week around pay, which is tough, there are lots of other things about policing which have been, I hope, good over the last couple of years. We've had big financial settlements. Obviously, the number of police officers growing very significantly. We're now touching towards 10,000 of the 20,000 extra that we wanted to recruit. We've got a police covenant coming in the autumn, which is looking at well-being and safety and family support for police officers. So we're trying to put everything we can behind those police officers to make sure that they feel valued. We give them the tools they need to do the job, and their primary motivation, which is the mission, that they feel they can get on with that as well.
Feeling valued, one of the ways to feel valued is to get a pay rise.
Yeah, so as part of the deal, while there is a pay freeze, obviously the lowest paid do still get a pay rise. There's still what they call progression pay. So if you're not at your pay band, you can still progress, which equates to about 2%. There was obviously a settlement, a pay rise last year. But, you know, balancing up the difficulties in the economy against the demands of the public sector, this was the decision that was made. And I understand it's tough. I realize people's disappointment. I guess what I'm trying to say is there are other things we're doing to try and make police officers feel valued as we work together to get on top of crime in this country.
Minister, police officers feel supported and valued. They had a vote of no confidence in your boss, the Home Secretary, last week. You're not giving them a pay rise. How, for the love of all that's holy, is that making them feel supported and valued? I don't understand.
Well, look, I understand, Nick, that the decision on pay was a tough one, and I totally appreciate the disappointment and indeed anger. Don't forget that officers at the lower end of the scale are still getting a pay rise, and any officer who's not at the top of their pay band will still get progression pay, which is equivalent to about 2%. But look, the Treasury have got to balance the ability of the private sector to pay with the service we want for the public sector. And that was a fine decision that was taken. There are other things, a finely balanced decision that was taken. There are other things that we could do to make police officers feel valued and supported. So you will know, later in legislation this year, we've got the police covenant coming, which is looking at wellness, safety, family support to make sure police officers feel that we're looking after them physically and mentally as they do their challenging job. Obviously, we're making sure there are lots more of them. to get out there and shoulder the burden more widely.
Mr.
So there's lots
Malthouse.
that we could do. But look, I understand that.
Mr. Malthouse, if I might call you that. Mr. Malthouse, are you living in a parallel universe? For only the second time in history, there was a vote of no confidence against a serving Home Secretary by the Police Federation of England and Wales. Days later, that next Home Secretary says that we're going to crack down on crime, I'll make yobs clean the street, and we want police officers to work even harder. Do you even listen to the news?
Well, I do, Nick. And as I say, it was a very unfortunate decision by the Police Federation to do that, not least, obviously, because the public sector pay freeze has been advertised some time before. And there are still, as I say, some officers who will get pay rises who are not at the top of their pay band or indeed are at the very lower end. So I'm sorry, but look, I recognise it's tough. Our job is to take these tough and difficult decisions. But what I'm trying to say is that it's not all bad news. There's lots of good stuff happening out there in policing. We've had two of the biggest financial settlements for some time over the last few years. We know there's another 8,000 police officers to come in allocations going forward. And we're making huge strides on the primary mission, which is dealing with crime and disorder. So I was out on the day in South Wales on a tour, talking to police officers. While pay was raised with regret a couple of times, most police officers raised with me how important and dedicated they were to their mission, and it was very heartening to see. But look, it's been a tough week. I understand that, on the back of a tough year.
Now, part of these police reforms are to expand stop and search. Why does the government feel that works? Looking at some others, Liberty, for example, saying the permanent relaxation of search powers would compound discrimination in Britain and divide communities.
Well, I'm afraid I just don't agree with that. And when people challenge me on stop and search, I often say, well, OK, if we can't do stop and search, what else should we do? But it has to be something we can do tonight, because we know that those people with knives in their pockets going to injure and kill are out there tonight. And if I were a parent of one of these young men, and it is often young men, sadly, who'd been killed, I would want to know that the killers might have been stopped and searched on their way to perpetrating that awful act. We know, certainly from my time in City Hall back in between 2008 and 2012, when we were dealing with a similar knife crime pandemic, that appropriately used with respect, stop and search can have a big impact in getting knives off the street. We've had some intensification weeks around knife crime using stop and search, but also wider sweeps and general searches, and taken thousands of knife off the street. And to those people who are critics of the tactic, I would say, look at the numbers, particularly in somewhere like London, and tell us what the immediate tactic should be instead. There's long-term work. I agree. It's not the long-term solution, but in the short term, it can have a big impact on suppressing knife crime.
You mentioned numbers, so I've got some for you. 99% of Section 60 searches don't find any weapons.
Well, yeah, but isn't that good, Kay? I mean, the whole point about a Section 60 search is it's a geographic search. It's an area where the police believe there may or will be violence. And so they spread it. They define a geography. They communicate to the community that they're going to be doing this stop and search. And it's meant to be a deterrent. If they don't find knives, that's good, isn't it? That's a result. The whole point about Section 60 is its deterrent value.
Divides communities. You've explained to me why you don't feel that divides communities. The director of the Criminal Justice Alliance quotes those figures and says that's exactly why it divides communities. She agrees with Liberty.
Well, I'm afraid I don't agree. And as I say, you have to look at the deterrent effect and say that when nothing happens, when no knives are found, then the communication of the fact that there is greater police presence, that the police are concentrating on knives in a particular geography where the police have intelligence, they think there may be violence, is good. I mean, it's like saying to counterterrorism policing, look, there was no terrorist incident, so what are you doing? Right? The whole point about policing and what we're trying to promote in our policing plan today is that we want to prevent crime. We want fewer victims. We want fewer knives on the street. And if we can signal to those people who would go out and perpetrate crime that they shouldn't, that they should do something else. Don't carry a knife. Don't go and be a burglar. Find something else to do. And so those numbers drop. That's exactly what we're aiming for.
I'll ask you what the plan, beating crime plan, means in just a moment, but you say you've been working hard to crack down on crime. This year, police recorded over 2 million incidents of antisocial behaviour. That's the highest in 7 years, and crime survey data reveals 13.6 million adults have witnessed or experienced antisocial behaviour in the last 12 months. You're not doing a very good job of it, are you?
Well, it's definitely the case, Nick, that we've seen a surge in ASB related to lots more people being at home and lots more people being in their neighbourhoods over the last few years. And one of the things that we've got in the plan is a focus on antisocial behaviour, bringing a sort of geographic analysis, trying to identify those areas through data that are most likely to have antisocial behaviour visited upon them, and then bringing police and crime commissioners and our heft towards the focus on that crime. As you will know, Nick, part of that is just bodies on the ground. We're almost touching halfway now to our 20,000 extra police officers, which is great news. Because they're new, most of them will be in uniform and on the streets, which means they can get in amongst those neighbourhoods that are blighted by ASB. And we had Antisocial Behaviour Week last week, and a number of police and crime commissioners, not least my own here in Hampshire, launched task forces to look at this issue. You know, Nick, as well as I do, that crime changes and adapts, and we have to do the same. And that's what we're doing on ASB from here on in.
All right. How are you and your colleagues going to make yobs clean the streets, as the headline screams out this morning, Minister?
So one of the tools at our disposal, Nick, is what we call unpaid work, which is where criminals are effectively sentenced to do community service or indeed to do unpaid work after they've served their time inside. Because we're bringing probation back in-house, it means we're able to take a much more kind of coherent and impactful approach towards that unpaid work. And so what we want to do is to consult with local communities about what they believe offenders should be doing in their community. And we've seen some great examples across the country, you know, groups of offenders clearing up woodland, picking litter, making sure areas are tidy and neat. And we want to make it visible so that reparations in local communities can be seen and felt.
But what happens? I am a yob and I refuse to tidy up the streets. What punishment will I face?
Well, if you don't comply with your sentence, you'll obviously be put back in front of the court and sentenced accordingly again. Wow. I mean, obviously, community centres and unpaid work is a part of your sentence. And like any offender, if you fail to fulfil your sentence, then you'll face consequences.
Now, in writing in one of the newspapers on the weekend, the Sunday Express, your boss, the Prime Minister, said that everybody who's a victim of crime would have a police officer assigned to that particular incident. Do you support that idea, Minister?
I do. And in fact, It's already in what's called the Victims' Charter, the Victims' Code, which will be making statutory later this year.
While I wouldn't expect you to know how many crimes were committed in England and Wales last year, I'll help you with that. It's 5.4 million. You'll know how many police officers broadly there are across the 43 forces for England and Wales, won't you, Minister?
Yes, at the moment, yes.
And what's the number there?
So at the moment, police officers, we've got about 136,000 is the last declared number.
That's 133,000. That's pretty impressive. Minister, that works out at 41 crimes per officer. How is that to be managed?
Well, as I say, Nick, obviously,
it's nonsense. It's a headline-grabbing stunt by a very, very prolific and proficient journalist. It's got the headlines. In reality, it boils down to a Mary Poppins promise or a pie crust promise. Easy to make, easy to break.
No, it's not the case, Nick. So, for example, you are, in theory, supposed to be able to go onto police.uk, put in your postcode, and find the named police officer in your area who's responsible for your neighbourhood. I've done it here in Hampshire. I've done it for my office in London to make sure it's working. Not all police forces have got there. We want to make sure that everybody is on police.uk and that everybody can find their named neighbourhood officers with contact details. And that's been part of the warp and weft for some time. And in the Victims' Code, you will have a right, as your case proceeds, if it proceeds, and not all do proceed, don't forget, that if it proceeds, you will have the right to have a named officer. Now, that officer might change from time to time because people retire or they go on a holiday. But in the end, Nick, you know that all policing is based on a relationship with the public. And the most critical relationship is that with victims. We want to hear an end to this. Well, I won't bother to report it because nothing happens, or I never hear back. We don't want that. There's a basic expectation about customer service that needs to be improved, and that's what we're trying to do.
Just 24,950 new coronavirus cases in the last 24 hours. That's the 6th consecutive daily fall, though. Why are the cases dropping?
Well, it's a good question, Kay, and I think it's probably something to do with the start of the school holidays. Obviously, the vaccine rollout increases every day, but we have to be very careful. 6 days of drop is great. Let's hope it continues. But we're waiting to see what happens over the next few days. We obviously had the release last Monday from all the restrictions pretty much back to normal life. We know with this virus, there's a lag of sort of 2 to 3 weeks before we see the impact of that. On the compensatory side, we've seen the start of the school holidays. It's a natural fire break, when people do break up a bit, separate a bit more. But also remember, normally this time of year, we'd have several million people overseas on holiday who we don't have, so there's more people in the country. It's quite an interesting cocktail of effects going on, which is why I think we have to wait until mid-August, see what's happening on the numbers, hope they continue downwards, and then take the next step.
Yeah, we also know that the hospitality industry has been absolutely hammered during this lockdown and the last 16, 18 months. And yet you are not exempting them from the having to stay at home if you've been pinged for 10 days. Why not?
Well, we're obviously having to balance the risk of contagion, controlling the spread of the disease, because it is still out there, don't forget. We're still, as you say, 24,000 cases odd yesterday. We're having to control that against the need to keep critical sectors of our economy going. So as you know, we have spread, this sort of test and release to other critical areas of the country. So policing, emergency workers, some in food supply, to try and keep that going. And I know that the Department of Health and Business are in constant conversation with business about what they need to keep going. We've only got a couple of weeks to go now till the 16th, when double jabbed people will be released, if you like. So we've just got to get through the next 2 weeks and make sure we control that virus so we can do so safely and cautiously.
The next tranche of critical workers has been revealed. Going to be people who are working in the fish industry and space and communications and HMRC. Still, no religious figures, Minister. So the taxman is free, but the vicar or rabbi is not. Why?
Well, Nick, I'm afraid I'm not close to the science around that particular decision. But look, what we've tried to do, and we have only got another couple of weeks to go to August the 16th, when hopefully the numbers, God willing, the numbers will allow us to say that if you're double vaccinated, you don't have to isolate. But what we're trying to do is have constant conversations with industry about critical areas and balance the risk of contagion against releasing the economy.
But how come the tax inspectors and the fishermen can walk free, but a rabbi or an imam or a priest cannot? I don't understand.
Well, because obviously fishermen in particular...
Does Boris not do God?
Fishermen are particularly part of the food supply chain, so it's very important that we maintain that. And we've been talking to the food supply industry about making sure that they've got the people they need. Frankly, I'm afraid, as they say, what are the two certainties in life? Death and taxes. Taxes need to be collected too. But look, we're in constant conversation with these people about where the critical points are. I was questioned at the weekend about airports and the impact on airports of the pandemic. And I said that the Department of Health and Transport would be in conversation with airlines about what they needed to make sure they were able to overcome some of the problems. But we've only got a couple of weeks to go now, Nick. Okay. Hopefully, fingers crossed, all will be well for the 16th.
Well, before I let...
Which is why you need more young people to take up the vaccine, but they're just not doing it. What are you going to do about it?
Well, we do. And obviously, we're urging people to get out there and get the jab. And of course, tens of thousands of people are every day. And that's the other reason for waiting, to try and urge as many young people as possible to get in there and do so. I mean, we know, that there is a high prevalence amongst those age groups. We want them to get vaccinated. We'll be communicating the hell out of that. And anything you could do to help us, parents, grandparents, friends, whatever it might be, to urge young people to go out there and get jabbed would be fantastic. Because before we get to that August the 16th, when we can hopefully come out of this pandemic to a certain extent, we need to get as many people jabbed under the wire as we possibly can.
Are you at a stage now where you are anxious that we're not going to reach herd immunity? Because we can't unless the kids get vaccinated.
Well, we have to wait and see. As I say, Kay, we're at this period of anticipation, of looking at what happens, both because we've come out of the restrictions, people are now getting back to normal life. We've got the natural fire break of the school holidays. We had to do that in the summer. Well, we've still got an advantage over the virus. And of course, the vaccine continues to roll out. So look at, there are wiser heads than mine, more scientifically trained heads than mine, looking at all the data, both in this country and across the world, to assess how we need to move in the future. And if we have to be agile, then we'll have to do that in 2 or 3 weeks' time. But for the moment, looking good so far. Fingers crossed for August.
Okay, what does agile mean? I mean, I know what it means. What does it mean to you?
Agile means obviously having to adapt to the path of the virus. I mean, over the last 18 months, we've learned a lot about the virus, and we've seen some oddities from it. We've seen some parts of the country that have been prone to it. We've seen different variations appear. We've had to take decisions about particular events or particular scenarios where the virus might have a greater risk of contagion. And that means moving quickly. That's caused some confusion, some frustration from people. But nevertheless, we know two things about this virus we do know. One, it grows very quickly, and two, it recedes quite slowly. And that means we have to move quite quickly. And then as we come out, we have to be cautious at the same time.
Okay, so that's a confirmation for the 16th of August, is it?
Well, as I say, I was asked on Sunday whether it would be earlier. I think that's unlikely. Let's all hope the numbers go well for the 16th, but people will be assessing in the week before what the numbers look like and then taking a decision nearer the time.
Talk to me about the government due to release travel announcements. That's going to happen next week. For families that are going to Greece or Spain or whatever this weekend, should they go or not?
Well, Kay, obviously there's a lot of uncertainty about travel overseas at the moment. As I said, I'm not close to those decisions. I know Department of Transport, Secretary of State is talking to Department of Health. They're constantly assessing the numbers. And Grant has said again and again, there was a lot of uncertainty about going overseas. I have to tell you, we had plans to go to Italy this year. And because of the uncertainty, we decided not to go. We're going to the lovely Northumbrian coast instead. And so while people... Obviously, there's a strong desire to go overseas, and lots of people are. I think they need to be aware that things may change. Okay. But as I say, I'm not close to that decision making, so I can't give you any further information than that.
Let me just play this to you. This is what the White House has said about travel to the UK overnight.
We will maintain existing travel restrictions at this point for a few reasons. The more transmissible Delta variant is spreading both here and around the world. Driven by the Delta variant, cases are rising here at home, particularly among those who are unvaccinated, and appear likely to continue in the weeks ahead.
So you Brits have got no chance of a travel corridor with the US for now, is what she's saying, basically.
Well, obviously, that's for them to assess. And we are assessing the likelihood of variants coming in from other countries as well. And so it doesn't surprise me that they're doing similar. It's obviously disappointing. Look, Kay, we want to get back to international travel as soon as possible. I've got lots of family overseas who I'd love to go and visit, particularly in Canada. But I'm afraid at the tail end of this virus, and let's hope it is the tail end, we're still coping with some of that uncertainty across the world, and people will have to bear that in mind as they decide their travel plans or otherwise.